Now, as the world looks to mitigate the environmental crisis caused by greenhouse gas emissions that have led to climate change, mandatory emissions trading programs and growing consumer pressures have driven companies to turn to the voluntary market for carbon offsets. Now, Betty Kiptum spoke to Kanika Yada, Director of Intercap Africa, to demystify what carbon credits are and how carbon markets operate. Here is how the conversation went.
And thank you for watching KBC Channel 1. It is time for an interactive session. Tonight we'd like to delve into matters carbon credits, carbon markets, and how marginalized communities can benefit from them. And to have this conversation is Kanika Yadav, who is the Director in charge of Intercap Africa. Thank you very much, Kanika, for speaking with us.
Thanks a lot, Betty, for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Karibu sana. Could you just tell us who you are and what you do?
Thank you. So my name is Karnika, as you just mentioned. I've been working over the last 15 plus years in the space of management and development finance consulting, primarily focusing on areas such as climate, gender, SME development, and how particularly the areas which have been unfocused, underserved, how private sector and the development finance can play a critical role in the emerging economies for solving those development challenges.
So we've been hearing about carbon credits, in the past few years. Could you tell us what they are?
Definitely. And it's a very interesting topic, and with the Africa Climate Week, it gained a lot of momentum also. So people keep hearing the word carbon and the climate, but exactly don't know what do these words mean. So the whole concept of the carbon credit came into existence back in 1997 when Kyoto Protocol was one of the engagements that laid down the standards, international standards for the reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions, and then further it was ratified with the Paris Agreement in the 2015, and that's how the carbon credit or the carbon markets came into existence. And basically what it means is that every carbon credit is sort of a commodity which can be created through the reduction, removal, or the storage of the greenhouse gas emissions. And how it works is that the people who are using the energy efficiency solutions or renewable energy or things like reforestation, afforestation, they are able to create, they are able to reduce their carbon footprints, in that process they are able to generate the carbon credits for that.
And how are they traded now on the carbon markets?
Okay, again, it's a complicated process, but I will try to simplify it so that it is anybody who is not aware of this term is able to understand it. So basically, carbon credits or the carbon market works in a four-stage process. The first process is actually the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions. So the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions, as I just mentioned, happens through the renewable energy projects or energy efficiency projects, those sort of things, which results in the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions. The second process is the project development. So there are project developers in the market who are able to convert those reduction in the greenhouse gases into a project documentation. And then third process is basically the verification. So there are third-party verification agencies like of the gold standards or the Vera, who verify whether what you are claiming to be carbon credits are actually the carbon credits, and actually you are doing things which are leading to the reduction in the greenhouse gas emission. So it's very important that these are verified. It's not that today I wake up in the morning and say, oh, I have carbon credits, and I start trading them. So there are verifying agencies who do that. And once the verification is done, the next process is the issuance of the credit. So these verification agencies also sort of quantify that the work or the projects that you are undertaking, how much it is leading to the reduction in the greenhouse gases. And for each metric ton of the reduction in the greenhouse gas emission, there is one credit that is issued. So then once it is verified, then the credits are issued, and once you have the credits, then the last process is the selling or the trading of those carbon credits. And usually it happens in there are like similar to like stock exchange and all, there are carbon market exchanges as well, and there are a lot of like aggregators and the sellers who will buy the carbon credits from the producers of the carbon credit and sell it to the big industrialized companies who are emitting a lot of greenhouse emissions, and then they want to buy these credits. So on these exchanges, these carbon credits are sold or traded.
I'm very curious, the way the carbon credits work. What is the rationale? Because it seems as though it's one person working for Mother Earth and the other person taking this as a permission to continue emitting. So what is the rationale here?
Yeah, and it's a very interesting topic, and internally also we keep having a lot of debate on this. Is it ethically right to do something like that? But the concept comes from the fact that yes, all the industries and all, they understand that there is a need for carbon reduction in their processes, but all of a sudden they can't do that. There needs to be a technology that needs to be developed that will ensure the way we are extracting the fossil fuels, or the way we are producing, refining the fossil fuels, or the way we are using the cars, they get more greener and cleaner. But that takes time, that is taking to time. While in that context there is a lot of work also happening, that the companies who are producing, they themselves start reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and a lot of countries internationally have put those standards also. But in the meantime, till the point that the technology has evolved and those companies are able to achieve their net zero goals, we call it net zero goals, because a lot of the countries where there is a compliance or the requirement, those companies have to offset their emissions. And in that context, they buy the carbon credits from the other players who are able to use greener technologies and are able to reduce or remove the greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere, and then they are able to create. So it's like a market-based approach. So one who is able to do it currently versus who is not able to do it, they are able to buy from each other or sell to each other. But ultimately the goal is that the net emissions of these industries, if these companies get to zero. So they become net zero in themselves. It's more of a stopgap measure till we have the technologies which lead to this.
Right. So until then, we continue trading the carbon markets. So what types of carbon markets are there?
Yeah. So broadly, there are two types of carbon markets. One is the voluntary carbon market, and the other one is the compliance carbon market. So the voluntary carbon market is, as the word says, voluntary. So it is the organizations or the governments who themselves give targets to them and say that we want to reduce our carbon footprint, and then in accordance to that they sell or buy the carbon credits, but there is no government regulations behind it. Versus the compliance carbon market is the carbon market particularly in the countries which have set the goals and given the goals to the industries in their respective countries, that they have to reduce their emissions by XYZ in the XYZ years. So in that context, they are more regulated, and then the compliance comes into play.
Right. So let's talk about the involvement of indigenous communities. We have seen evictions happening, you know, as governments try to get their forests together and sell these carbon credits. What is the importance of collaboration with indigenous communities in this sense?
Yeah, and that's actually a very interesting topic, Betty, because yes, while we have seen that a lot of times this negative publicity on the carbon credits come in place, but actually carbon credits can also play a very critical role in making sure the accessibility and the affordability of essential services is there for these indigenous communities and the people in the marginalized and the low income areas. I'll give you an example. For instance, you may have heard a lot about the clean cook stoves in that context, or even maybe using the solar-based small cold storage facilities. And we are sitting in Kenya, and we know that post-harvest losses are a big problem for the smallholder farmers because they do not have access to these cold storage facilities. So there are some organizations and some companies that are providing these small last mile cold storage facilities, solar-based cold storage facilities. And what they were doing earlier was selling these cold storage facilities small, like in a box, to the smallholder farmers. But smallholder farmers always do not have the required access to finance to buy these products. And that's where the carbon credits come into place, because now, because it's a solar-based technology, it's not a fossil fuel or fossil fuel-based or electricity-based or coal-based for that context. So now these companies, these organizations, because of the usage of the solar, are able to get the carbon credits for their business that they are producing, and then using the revenue that they are generating through the carbon credits, they are able to subsidize the cost of those cold storage facilities to the farmers. So earlier farmers were not able to access those because, as I said, problems of the access to finance, but with the carbon credits they get it a much cheaper rate, and then now they are able to use that, and which ultimately results in the reduction in the post-harvest losses and the improvement in the incomes of these small-scale farmers. The same goes for the clean cook stoves also, because again, the people in the marginalized communities, otherwise they were not able to afford these clean cook stoves and continue to use them on a regular basis. But then because they are clean in nature, the companies can, and a lot of companies are actually using the IoT technologies in these clean cook stoves and generating carbon credits out of it. And they are selling those carbon credits to the international buyers, and in turn they are reducing the cost or subsidizing the cost of these cook stoves, which is now making this product affordable to these people in these rural and low income communities. Mm-hmm. So in that context, what I will say is that if the solution, this carbon credit solutions are designed in a way that it is leading to the affordability and accessibility of the essential services for the low income population, then they are playing a very critical role. Otherwise they will not have access to it. But at the same time, similar to the example that you gave, that people are getting evicted and all, which is not sustainable in a long-term basis, because carbon credit just doesn't mean that you are able to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. The price of the carbon credit varies with how you are generating those credits. And now with more and more advancing of the carbon credit, it's also there are also standards being put into place that are trying to ensure that you are using a just transition, so you are not like just evicting the people, not giving the benefits to the people where they are. And if you're doing all these things, you're making sure the benefit is involved, the benefit is shared and the community is involved, then in turn basically you are able to get the higher price for your carbon credits. So that assists gradually to the carbon project developers to avoid these things. And then in turn, it's also responsible that the governments, particularly African governments, start understanding this, and they are putting the guidelines which make sure that the community is involved in these carbon project development.
You mentioned that the company that maybe deals in the cook stoves is the one that sells the credits and then passes on the benefit to the users, the consumers. who is to say that they cannot or they will actually pass this benefit to the consumers? They might as well sell their credits, you know, make their profits and still keep the prices high. Is there a way to make sure that they do?
Because it makes business sense for them. If it was just a good to do thing, they may not have done it, but it makes business sense to them, and I'll tell you how. Because if they are able to reduce the price of their cook stoves, they are able to sell more. Otherwise, they could have a brilliant product, but the affordability of the product was not there, and people will not buy that product. So with the usage of the carbon credit, they are able to make the product affordable, and in turn more and more people are able to buy their products, which increases their customer base, which in turn increases their revenue, and so it's a win-win situation for both the parties.
You mentioned at the end about the African leaders understanding these and coming up with policies and regulations. The market pricing of carbon credits is very diverse across the world. And considering that Africa and other low emitters, you know, could make the most out of these carbon markets, how can we ensure that the pricing favors the people who really, you know, matter in this food chain, so to say? Yeah.
So some of the things that can be done is like what's happening now is, as I mentioned, there are these third-party verifiers, and then there are these aggregators or the sellers that are involved in this whole value chain, and mostly none of those players are actually originated or based out of Africa as of now. So what happens is then the value just gets passed on to the players, more to international players. So that's why there is relevance or importance to build the local infrastructure for the carbon markets, carbon exchanges, so that the more trading of these products can happen locally. And when this trading of the products can happen locally, in that context, it will be closer to the project development, carbon project development, and then the people will be able to gain more value out of it. That's one thing. The second thing is also, for instance, the government of Kenya is in the process of coming up on the guidelines that for every carbon credit sold from Kenya, X percentage of those revenues will go to the government as the taxes in terms of the taxes. So in that context also, if it's going to the government as the taxes, then the assumption is then the taxes will be used for the infrastructure and other development within the country itself. So, and similarly, a lot of other countries in Africa are also coming up with these sort of regulations, which will eventually ensure that the benefits are getting passed on more to the producers of these carbon credits, actual producers of these credits.
Speaking of the actual producers, yeah, the marginalized communities, the indigenous communities, clearly there is a lot to understand in these markets, yeah, and the carbon credits, and for even these communities to be involved, you know, in the process. Is there something that is being done in terms of sensitization of these communities?
So I'll say not fully to the extent that it should be done, but it has started. Because when the project developers develop the project, and the project development means that you get in the land, and if maybe you are using it for putting up a solar project on that, or maybe you get a land and you are doing it for the forestation activities and all those things, and then generating carbon credits out of it. So in that context, and since most of the land in Kenya is owned by the community, so in that context, like communities are getting involved in those projects. But then what's happening is definitely there is a need for a lot more capacity building for the people to understand when I'm doing this thing, if I'm getting 0.5 cents versus it is getting sold in the market at $5, the same credit, how much I can get, and what are the other costs associated? Am I getting the right price, or I can get? So there is a need for more awareness creation, more capacity building on that. So that's one on the communities itself. But on the other hand, from the regulations perspective also, as I mentioned, the carbon credits are like this different projects, everything is the same solar project, and it's leading to the same outcomes, but the carbon credits generated out of the solar project A versus the solar project B can be different, and those differences can be because of how those credits are generated, whether the community was involved in that, whether sustainable practices were adopted in all those things as well. And that's the role of the verifiers also, to ensure that they're not just focusing on how much greenhouse gas reduction is happening, but how it is happening. So how part then the communities get involved. So if you are doing it in a better way and you're getting you can charge a premium on your carbon credit.
Timber harvesting, agriculture, they are some of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, and a lot of this is happening, at the grassroots levels. How can communities be empowered to also, contribute for a better future of the earth?
Yeah, and you'll be surprised to know, like after the fossil fuel or the energy sector, agriculture is one of the biggest emitter of the greenhouse gases emissions. Almost about 18 to 20% of the global greenhouse gases emission comes from the agriculture sector. So yes, agriculture sector and even the timber industry, which is a part of the agriculture sector, are a big contributors of the greenhouse gas emissions. Some of the things which could be done at the grassroots level is getting back to our indigenous practices, the way we were doing agriculture back in the days, and things like regenerative agriculture, or things like agroforestry. Like in the past, back in the days, it doesn't used to be that the whole acres of land were just used for farming and there were no trees in that farmland. Because when you are able to mix the crops, mix and use the practices of the agroforestry, which is agriculture plus forestry, you are able to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the same acre of a land. The same thing is also on the using the climate smart agricultural practices, making sure that you are using the right amount of the fertilizers. Overuse of fertilizers doesn't help in increasing the production, but obviously it leads to much more production in the greenhouse gas emissions. For the irrigation, solar-based irrigation services rather than the coal or the fuel-based irrigation services to be used. Water management, ensuring you are using techniques like drip irrigation and all those, so that you are using the right amount of water. So all these things can eventually lead to the reduction in the greenhouse gas emission that is generated by the agriculture sector. And it's not that these are something new. Traditionally in the agriculture sector, the indigenous communities or people who are been in the farming for generations have been using it. We have just forgotten it with the commercialization of the inputs, the fertilizers. So we have to get back to our traditional know-hows and practices and start using those again.
As we come to a close of the conversation, Kanika, what is the future looking like in terms of carbon markets and specifically marginalized communities?
Yeah. The carbon markets, as of now, it is estimated by 2030 or so will be anywhere between the global value of the carbon markets will be between, let's say, about $20 to $50 billion, which is a huge number. And carbon markets and the carbon credits can play actually a very significant role for the growth of Africa as a continent. Yes, while we are one of the lowest emitters of the greenhouse gas emissions, but then that's also an opportunity for us to use all those low greenhouse gas emission technologies and all to generate carbon credits and then sell that to the international buyers that are currently demanding for these things. So in that context, carbon credits, carbon market can provide an access to a lot of climate financing capital to Africa as a continent, and which will ultimately assist it in reaching the sustainable development goals and the economic goals that it wants to reach.
Awesome. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
I have been speaking with Kanika Yadav, who is the director at IntelliCap Africa. We have been talking about carbon credits, carbon markets, how marginalized communities are benefiting and could benefit some more in the future, and just how to make sure that the legal front and the regulatory front are also just aligned to ensure that indigenous communities are well protected as well. My name is Betty Kiptum. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing. Thank you.